Hi, I'm Cheri Calnan. Most of my career has been spent working in the commercial construction industry, spending my time with interior designers, architects, and engineers on projects such as hospitals, universities, corporate headquarters, and manufacturing facilities. I've been involved in numerous organizations over the years with a preference on sustainability, energy efficiency, and recycling. Currently, I'm involved in the Connecticut Green Building Council on the Advocacy Committee. I'm also the liaison to our state representative, John Hampton, as well as the Home Builders Remodelers Association in Connecticut. I'm also a member of the International Living Future Institute Connecticut Collaborative. So today we want to talk about what is sustainability and how can we bring sustainability into our everyday life. I'm going to be talking with James Albis, who is the state legislator for the East Haven area, and he's also the executive director of the Connecticut Green Building Council. And we're going to highlight some of the organizations that are leading the charge of sustainability, and we want to find out who is determining what is and is not sustainable and who's monitoring all this and what's happening at the Connecticut state legislative level. Also, we're going to highlight some of the organizations such as the International Living Future Institute and what's happening there with the Living Building Challenge. And in the end, we'll let you know how you can bring this into your everyday life, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thank you. We're talking with James Albis. James is the state legislator for the East Haven, Connecticut area. He's also the deputy majority leader, the former chairperson for the Environmental Legislative Committee. He is the president of the Resilient Solutions Sustainable Consulting Firm and on the task force for the Shoreline Preservation. James received his BA at NYU in economics, and he received his master's at the Yale School of Forestry on environmental studies. He's also been a teaching fellow and a research assistant at Yale University, and comes with us with a wealth of knowledge on the environment, and we thank you for joining us today.
Well, Cheri, thank you so much for having me.
So, James, tell me, what prompted you to want to get involved in environmental studies?
Well, that's a great question, and you kind of laid out my background a bit. So, you know that I graduated with an undergraduate degree in economics, and the environment wasn't necessarily the top thing on my mind. But in my first year in office as a state representative in East Haven, which was 2011, we were slammed by Tropical Storm Irene, and just a year later by Superstorm Sandy. And it really made me shift my priorities and my focus as a legislator. Witnessing those two events and how they affected my town and my constituents made me realize how woefully underprepared we were as a town and as a state to deal with the effects of climate change and extreme weather events and things of that nature. So I asked the then Speaker of the House what we could do about it, and he suggested that we start a task force, and he asked me to chair it, and that was the task force on shoreline preservation. So I worked in a bipartisan manner with a number of House members and state senators, as well as some subject matter experts, to develop a list of 50 recommendations for the state on shoreline preservation. And many of those recommendations actually became law, and some were enacted through executive action. So it was a very successful task force, and it showed me how to work together with people who don't necessarily come at issues from the same place. Right. So from there, I became more motivated to learn more about climate change and how it's going to affect our society and our institutions and our structures, and that motivated me to go back to graduate school, and that's where I got my degree in environmental management.
That's wonderful. So what do you think is the most important aspect of sustainability as it relates to the built environment? You know, our homes, our offices, our community.
That's a great question, and I think it's very complicated. It's a complex question. Sustainability means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I think if you look at it from a macro perspective, what it really means is that we are acting in ways that preserve our environment, preserve our social structures, and leave the world a better place for generations to come. And so I think if you use that mentality on the micro level, it can kind of dictate how you approach different industry sectors. And you mentioned I work now for the Connecticut Green Building Council, so obviously our big focus is the built environment. And I think the areas where we have the most to gain, I guess, from sustainability are energy efficiency, water usage, and I think this is becoming much more apparent now, but health and wellness in buildings. Traditionally, I think when you think of sustainable buildings, you do think about buildings that utilize solar energy or buildings that have great energy efficiency, so the utility bills are low. So to my mind, those are probably the most important, maybe not the most important, but the things that come to mind first when you think about sustainable building.
So we hear the term resiliency a lot. Explain what that means as it relates to the built environment.
Well, resiliency refers to generally ensuring that the built environment is set to withstand the effects of climate change and extreme weather events. So for a town like East Haven, where we went through Tropical Storm Irene and Superstorm Sandy, what that means is resilience to flooding events, resilience to high winds, and that means utilizing certain building strategies to reduce the impact to the home. So that could mean raising the home above the base flood elevation to make sure that even if there's a flood to the likes of an Irene or Sandy, it's not going to affect the major structures. You might have the parking garage underneath the house, but you won't have the critical infrastructure like your living area and some of the mechanical infrastructure that you need to maintain your house. It could also mean creating a better stormwater management on your property. So creating rain gardens, bioswales that will withstand some flooding and mitigate the flood damage to the rest of the home. So it could mean a lot of different things. But resilience also can be thought of in terms of our societal structures. So when you think about an extreme weather event, you may have an area that has to be evacuated. Where do you put those people when the evacuation happens? Resiliency means having systems in place where if this happens, we're going to do this. And if option A fails, we have backup options as well. So say each town actually has to have a hazard mitigation plan in the case of these extreme weather type of events. If you have an evacuation and folks don't have any family or friends to stay with, maybe you have the high school as the designated place where they can go. But what if the high school loses power? You need to have a backup location too. So resilience means having all of these pieces in place so that you know that you're not going to stop a major weather event from happening, but you have the ability to respond to it and the ability to ensure that people are safe and that damage is mitigated.
So you're anticipating the worst case scenario and then setting up your plans, walking it backwards from there.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So we hear the term fossil fuels all the time. We hear how we have the need to find alternative sources of energy and kind of getting away from the use of fossil fuels. Explain why that is. Why is it so important that we get away from fossil fuels, and why do we need to find alternative sources for energy? Sure.
Well, fossil fuels are sources of energy that come essentially from the ground, right? They're literally fossils of old plants or old animals that are dug up from the ground or extracted from the ground in one form or another and then burned to create energy. So the two most common fossil fuels that people hear about are natural gas and oil. And when we burn gas and oil, they have emissions that contain a lot of carbon dioxide. And when carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere, it tends to cause a heating effect. So when the sun's rays come down and hit the earth, they bounce off the earth and may go back into the atmosphere. But carbon dioxide is actually an element that reflects that heat back down, those sun's rays back down to the earth. So the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the more sun is coming back down to earth after it's getting reflected off the first time. So that heats our environment. And this heating is going to cause, and already has started to cause, a number of changes in our global climate. One major thing that we're seeing in Connecticut is the rising of sea levels along our coastline and along rivers throughout the state. And that has major impacts when it comes to extreme weather events like Superstorm Sandy, because the higher the sea levels are, the further inland will experience flooding because the water is starting from a higher point.
Right.
But there are also implications on health when we think about the heating of our atmosphere. More 90-degree days means that there will be more days that are at risk for very young children and for the elderly. And in addition to that health risk, think about the sources of carbon emissions. They're power plants, they're cars, right? We burn gasoline to drive our cars unless you are lucky enough to own an electric car.
Right.
Those not only have carbon dioxide, but they have other chemicals in them that when burned could be harmful to the environment. So, for example, the city of New Haven, which is at the intersection of 95 and 91 and sees a lot of traffic day in and day out, has higher asthma rates than the rest of the state of Connecticut because of the amount of car emissions. So, we have the carbon dioxide, which is causing the heating of our atmosphere and the heating of our climate. And we have these other emissions that could cause health problems like ground level ozone and nitrous oxide. So it's important to understand the effects of burning these fossil fuels. And that's why, as you alluded to, there has been a push to switch to renewable sources of energy. And what that means, renewable sources means we're not going to run out of these sources of energy, right? There's a finite amount of oil and gas in the ground.
Yeah.
And if we burn it, it just goes away. But with renewable sources like the sun's rays and wind power, those are sources that are not going to go away. So they're renewable by nature, and frankly, they cause less harm to the environment because there aren't these harmful emissions that go along with them.
So if someone wanted to be more sustainably conscious, bring this type of living into their home environment, why would they, and what is the benefits to them and their families to do that?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, if you live in a home or retrofit a home for energy efficiency, you are immediately going to experience savings on your monthly electric bills. So that is a real tangible benefit that you would enjoy just from doing simple upgrades that keep heat and cool air from escaping through windows and through doors. Also, thinking about light fixtures, how can you use more efficient light bulbs, which can save you tens, if not hundreds of dollars a year. So those are some real tangible benefits. But think about the societal transition to sustainability and more sustainable actions. If you make a point to buy an electric car or buy an electric lawnmower, you are reducing emissions in your house, and you're also making the market better. You're saying, I'm willing to take this to buy this product, and the more products that are bought, the cheaper the cost will be for everybody. So if 20,000 people buy electric cars, that sends a signal to the manufacturers that, okay, that's about how many I need to make for this year. But if that amount is higher, then they have more money to spend on advertising, and eventually their product gets out to more people, and they can drive their costs down as well. So that's kind of more big picture, and you don't see as immediate benefits as doing energy efficiency or maybe putting solar panels on your roof where you can save energy that way as well. But I think the best thing that people can do is really spread that mentality to their friends and family. The more people are bought into sustainability, the more we're going to have a sustainable society and leave our world better off for the next generation.
I definitely think there's a misconception that being sustainable is more expensive, right?
Right.
And there's products that are better towards our health, or products that we want to have are surrounding us, even as simple as a pillow or sheets, in our home. So let's talk about who's leading the charge, the organizations that are leading the charge on sustainability, and who's determining what is a sustainable product and what isn't, and how is that all being monitored?
Sure. Well, there are a number of different organizations that actually do this. From my perspective, I think the U.S. Green Building Council is one of the most important organizations that's doing this, and the Connecticut Green Building Council, in full disclosure, is a chapter of the USGBC. But the USGBC works very closely with the Green Business Certification Institute, which monitors programs like LEED, which some of your viewers may have heard of, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. That is the most common and most prevalent green building rating system in the world. And what that involves is a large set of criteria that building designers and operators have to adhere to during the construction process, during the design phase, to ensure that the building is built in a sustainable manner. You have to keep a tally sheet of what you're doing and submit that to GBCI, the Green Business Certification Institute, and they will monitor and determine if your building actually meets LEED standards. So they're just one organization that's doing this. There are also a number of organizations that specifically monitor products and will have lists of products that meet sustainability standards, like have low VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds and could be harmful to your health. So they might have a list of low paint or low VOC paints that you can use if you're remodeling your home. But when it comes to building certification in particular, USGBC and GBCI are the two major players. There are, LEED was very popular for a long time, about 15 years ago. It came about, and in that time, especially in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, there have been a number of new rating systems pop up. Some of the most popular have been the WELL building standard, which focuses on health and wellness. There is Passive House, which talks a lot about really reducing the initial energy use. So energy efficiency upgrades make a huge difference and could make a house essentially use net zero energy. And then I think you may have mentioned this already earlier in the program, but there's also the International Living Future Institute, which promotes the Living Building Challenge. And that is a very, very ambitious green building certification system where, unlike LEED, where you kind of fill out your chart as you're going along in the design and construction phase, the Living Building Challenge will monitor the building's actual performance for the first year or two after it's constructed and occupied, so that they can say, okay, you actually are doing net zero energy, you're actually using less water than most buildings, your stormwater infrastructure is performing as we expected it would, and you could have that real-time data to prove, okay, yeah, we are meeting these very high standards from the Living Building Challenge.
And they also take into consideration the intent in that process as well.
That's right.
With the Living Building Challenge.
That's right.
So beyond the basics of recycling our cans and our bottles, as far as turning the water off when we're brushing our teeth or shutting the lights off when we're walking out of the room, what other things can we be doing to begin to bring sustainability into our life? because I think it can be overwhelming, for someone who's, wanting to improve their home life or their work life, their community as a whole, but, can feel a little bit overwhelmed and like, well, how do I start? Where do I start? And, to make it simple and not too much of a challenge,
Well, I would certainly encourage folks to go to the Connecticut Green Building Council website, www.ctgbc.org. We do a biweekly newsletter where we try to send out a lot of information about what the latest trends in sustainability are, what some people are doing in their own homes and in their own workplaces to promote sustainability, and have, in general, a great wealth of information about sustainability. But I would also encourage people to look up companies and organizations that will certify sustainable products, like the Sustainable Forest Initiative. They're an organization that does that as well. So you can make sure that when you purchase a product, a cleaning product, a school supply, work supply, you know that it's coming from a sustainable source. You know that it was being made sustainably. I think another aspect is buying local. A lot of people, I think, do that to support local businesses and support their friends and families who might work for those local businesses. And I think that's certainly reason enough to buy local. Right. But when you think about the impacts to the environment, it's just an added bonus. So going to your local farmers market, buying at the mom and pop store instead of the big box store, those businesses often get their materials sourced locally because it makes sense to them, and they are bought into sustainability as well. I would suggest on a broader scale, getting outside of the household. As I mentioned before, promoting sustainability to your friends and family and getting them to buy into it as well is a big piece of it. The only way we're going to make progress, or major progress on a large scale, is having the majority of the public bought into sustainability as something that is good for them, is good for society, and is good for the future of our children and grandchildren. One exciting program that just began in Connecticut is called Sustainable Connecticut, and it's a sustainability rating system essentially for each municipality in the state if they choose to be involved. Okay. So I would encourage the viewers to check with your town's first selectman or mayor and see if they have become involved in Sustainable Connecticut. Again, they're similar to Lead-In, that they have a huge list of criteria that you can follow to meet their sustainability standards. But I think a lot of people have shown excitement about this, and it gives residents an opportunity to learn more about what they can do to be more sustainable and what their community can do to be more sustainable. So I would certainly encourage folks to learn more about that.
Yeah, that's great. So also, we're talking about local, communities. Talk about what's happening on the legislative level here in Connecticut. I know there's been some activity recently. Do you want to expand on that? Sure.
So as I'm sure your viewers are aware, the state has been facing some pretty challenging financial times. And what that has meant is that a lot of difficult decisions have to be made for better or worse. And unfortunately, that's meant that some of the good environmental programs have been suffering over the last couple of years. And that includes the first in the nation Connecticut Green Bank, which has served as a model for other states across the nation in providing financing for renewable energy projects and energy efficiency projects. Unfortunately, their funding got cut in almost half. And that has made it much more difficult for them not only to retain staff, obviously, but to convince banks that their investments are worthwhile. So that has been a major challenge. We've also had to cut a lot from the Energy Efficiency Fund, which again provides opportunities for homeowners and business owners to invest in energy efficiency upgrades to their home or business property. And that program I thought was phenomenal, because not only is it helping these homeowners and business owners, but it's creating jobs in the process. It's creating job opportunities for people who do energy efficiency retrofits and it's estimated that there will be a couple thousand jobs lost simply because of this cut alone. So it's a big step backward in a state that I think we all thought was on the forefront in thinking about the environment and climate change and energy issues. So we really need to make sure that we're thinking about that in a much more forward-thinking way when the legislature comes back into session in 2019. And I hope that folks, as you know, this year's an election year, are asking candidates what their views are on sustainability and climate change and environmental issues.
That's a lot. It's a lot happening. I know we've only touched on the surface of what is happening and what we can do as a community on sustainability. We have a few minutes left, and I want to just find out if there's anything more that you'd like to add that maybe we haven't touched on so far.
Well, I think when we think about sustainability in general, as I said at the outset, it's a very complex topic. And sustainability can mean different things to different people. So find out what it means to you. Does it mean convincing your family that getting solar panels is a good idea? Does it mean really rethinking the way you handle your water use at your business? Does it mean getting more involved with an organization that is actively engaged with policymakers and others who are doing things out in the field? Find your voice in sustainability and run with that, because it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And I think when you are able to find your path, that's when we see success, and you can enable others to get that same success.
Great. Thank you so much, James, for taking the time to come up here and meet with me and talk about all this great stuff that's happening in our community. And I'm very excited, because I think even though maybe we've taken some steps back, financially at the state level, I think, we're still moving forward. We have a lot more work to do, but, this is the process. If we can bring more information, more education to the general public, I think it will help with that movement for sure.
I think that's right. Knowledge is power. And
yeah.
Thank you again for having me, Cheri.
Great. Thanks, James. Have a good day.
You too.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.